Mars. We all know it. We all love it. And being human, we want to colonize it. Mars, being the fourth planet of our solar system, is infamous for its existence. Humans love exploring after all, and just like our ancestors, if we want to survive, we want to live there. It makes sense. After all, we've destroyed our own planet, so what better to do than to ruin even more in hopes of finding another planet so we can ruin that as well. Don't get me wrong, I think this is silly. We are much better off trying to fix Earth. But this is a school assignment, and I was assigned to check if I can, if we can, not if we should. So, what would affect Mars' colonization? For starters, 1 year now takes 3 years. A single Martian year is 687 Earth days. Oh, speaking of days, a day on Mars is kind of similar to that of Earth's, clocking in at 24.6 hours. This is very good for our circadian rhythms and won't be much of a bother to the colonists. Sadly, Mars is always sunny. So forget what I said if it still hurts. With that said, there are a few advantages. For example, solar panel will be much more useful than it is on Earth, allowing for us to have lots and lots of electricity, which will be very useful for production. Sadly, for reasons mentioned later, this won't actually be amazing. A year difference would also hurt, but only by seasons, which barely exist. In fact, the closest thing Mars has to weather are hilariously deadly dust storms. You see, dust storms on Mars, these things are huge, heavy, and toxic. And this can obviously cause several problems for people trying to live on Mars. Small leak in your house, dead. Forgot to bring your suit, dead. Left something outdoors, drenched in dust. Solar panels, well, pretty much unusable. As you might guess, this dust comes from the ground, which means that the ground itself, and by extension the lithosphere, is also very toxic. This means we'll have to bring our own plants and soil. There are a few extremophile organisms, but there's not really enough that will help us at the moment. This is made even worse by the atmosphere, water, and temperatures. First, water. Rovers have found water on Mars, but there's so little water that the only real way we're going to get anything useful is if we melt all the ice. Second, the atmosphere. It's so thin that our lungs immediately collapse upon trying to leave our base. We'll need suits all the way through, and that's not exactly helped by toxic dust. Third, temperatures. Mars is freezing. At its lowest, Mars runs at a very nice and cool negative 153 degrees Celsius, and at its highest temperature, the peak of the peak, we get 20. With that said, we can apparently heat it up. More on that later. But not everything is bad. The gravity of Mars is 38% of that of Earth. The main advantage of this is that, according to SpaceX, we can lift heavy things and bound around. Of course, the 38% is not worth the disadvantages. Weak gravity ruins our bones, our muscles, makes our spines a smidge longer to the point that it's uncomfortable, and our cardiovascular system is worsened too. It's not worth this for lifting heavy stuff. Another thing is transportation. Out of all the planets, excluding Venus, Mars takes the least amount of energy to get to. In our most energy efficient method, this takes 9 months, but this can be sped up to 6 months if we use a little bit more energy. It's one of the few good things about Mars. Or so you thought! After all, transportation is comparatively easy, but the effects of microgravity in space are a serious concern for the people trying to live on Mars. By the time they actually get to Mars, they'll be weak, have horrible bones, and be unbearably disoriented. And another thing, radiation! Mars has a magnetosphere not nearly as strong as Earth's. And with its already thin atmosphere, Mars lets a lot of solar radiation onto the ground. Although we can shield ourselves from it, the best way we could do so is either with some big structure in outer space, or being a depressed civilization of underground colonists. Now this is obviously very, very scattered, so let's get some pros and cons and see how humans will adapt. Pros of Mars is that we can lift heavier things, we can bound around, but we also get really good solar power, and, excluding Venus, Mars takes the least amount of energy to get to, which means it's our best bet as a B planet in case Earth fails. Cons of Mars include that it's freezing cold, it has toxic and heavy dust storms, we get very weak by the time we're there, and also on Mars. We have little amounts of water, the atmosphere is very deadly, there's no life except a small number of organisms, and getting there wears down everyone by a lot. List done. As I said before, I'd mentioned how humans would adapt. So how would humans adapt? Well, of course, it all comes down to equipment. At bare minimum, we'll need basic utilities such as oxygen power, local communications, waste disposal, sanitation, and water recycling, habitats, storage facilities, workspaces, airlocks for pressurization and dust, resource extraction equipment, energy production and storage, food production, propellants, fuels, or other energy sources for use with surface transportation, off-planet communication equipment, and equipment for moving over the surface, like a suit and rovers. With all this equipment, we end up negating many of the cons. The toxic atmosphere, the air pressure, the toxic soil, having no plants or life, dust storms, and so on. Even so, effects like getting there and the heaps of radiation are not avoided by all this equipment. Of course, there is one more thing to note. Firstly, the cold. As I mentioned previously, I said that we could already heat up Mars, but how? Well, as SpaceX says, Mars is cold, but we can make it hotter. According to Elon, the wisest among us, we could terraform Mars by exploding a nuclear bomb over its polar caps. The heat release would vaporize the frozen carbon dioxide to greenhouse warm the planet and melt the water ice. Radiation won't be much a problem, since the explosion is not on the planet, but rather all the way up in space. I have a bad feeling about this. So, what are my thoughts? To sum it up, Mars is very brutal, and considering all the factors and etc. that we'll have to go through, getting there will definitely be a Sisyphean task. But knowing the unstoppable human desire to seek and destroy everything that we know exists, we're gonna succeed anyway. Well, it seems like that's it. Hope I do well, and to the rest of you, this does not fulfill my 2-week quota. I have another video scheduled soon. It's already done. It just needs to upload next week. Well, have a good day! Wait! This is a school project. No outro, citations only.